Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about what's going on with the US government's plans for a possible military draft. It was in the news, although not many people noticed, that on December 18th, 2025, Congress passed a law and it was signed into law by President Trump shortly thereafter, mandating that registration for the military draft in the United States for men ages 18 to 35 will not only be mandatory, as it has been for the past several decades, but will be automatic. What they have proposed, or what they are planning to do as of December 2026, the new law will take effect, and it will include automatic registration of all males of that age group starting on their 18th birthday. And this will utilize various government databases, including the Social Security database, as well as databases from state departments of motor vehicles. So this is something that the government over decades has promised never to do, but Congress has apparently seen that this is necessary. My suspicion is that they foresee, or rather foresaw, the current war with Iran, and that they were putting into place mechanisms to make sure that the United States had a supply of fresh soldiers, draftees to send into battle as needed. It's interesting timing, and interesting that this was an issue that was going on for decades, where the Selective Service Agency was stating for many years, decades in fact, that only about half of men of eligible age or mandatory age were registering for the draft, and that the majority of them were unreachable shortly after registration, because the vast majority of them do not update their address when they move. And as we know, Americans move rather frequently, especially in that age group. So it was clear to the Selective Service Administration that in the event of a military draft, that they would be basically unable to locate very many men for a draft, even though a large number of them are registered. So this was part of the motivation for Congress to act, but it's interesting that they chose not to act through all of the Cold War and the post-Cold War era, and only within the past few months did they decide that legislation was necessary. And this was, of course, bipartisan, as these things usually are. So what I'd like to say today is that if you have sons or grandsons, or you know anyone that does, please be aware that if they are registered for a Social Security number, and if they register for a driver's license that involves a Social Security number, that they will automatically be registered for the draft. Interestingly, I know that in other states, I live in Arizona, but in other states, I know, like in Florida, it's been automatic at age 18 to when you register. When young men apply for a driver's license, they're automatically registered for the draft if they're over 18. However, if they're under 18, they are not, but my understanding is that in that case they are made to sign a statement that they intend to register when they turn 18. It's unbelievable, but yeah, which really has no legal validity. especially since the person signing it is a minor. But that's a side point. So what I would say, though, in general, about Social Security numbers, which I like to refer to as slave numbers, these are unnecessary and they're completely optional. Most Americans don't realize that you do not need to have a Social Security number, not by law anyways. They're not mandatory. Some people may find them useful in certain situations, but they're not mandatory by any means. There's no law that requires them, and it would be unconstitutional to mandate them. They only came into existence during the previous century. Prior to that, there was no such thing, and there was no law that was passed when Social Security numbers were introduced by the government in the, I think it was the 1930s or 40s. So what I would like to emphasize again is that Social Security numbers are unnecessary, completely optional, and worst of all, having one, if you are male, could prove fatal. That sounds a bit overly dramatic, but let me explain. So my son is 17 years old. He does not have a Social Security number, yet he has a U.S. passport. He attends a public high school. He can even get a driver's license without one, although this does vary by state. It is even possible to have a bank account and to work in certain situations without one, although certainly people will tell you, and ChatGPT will tell you otherwise. So, the Social Security number. It's important to note that it is not intended, and it does not actually benefit the person who is assigned it. It's for the benefit of the government, so that they can tax that person, and so that they can confiscate that person's body, and thus their life, such that they can send them to kill and die for bankers, of course. The Social Security number is basically a receipt of total ownership of that person by the government, which is why they want you to hold on to your cards. It's a very important receipt. Once you have sold yourself to the government, they want you to hold on to that receipt so you can prove that you no longer own yourself. Believe it or not, the government also, or quasi-government agencies like the Federal Reserve, also use Social Security numbers as collateral for government loans, and without them, the Fed would not be able to get any loans at all. So, if you do choose to register your son, or anyone who chooses to register their son, that young man will automatically be registered for the military draft on their 18th birthday, and will be tracked on this, using this and other databases whenever they move in the U.S. and overseas. As I suggested earlier, Congress and every U.S. administration has always promised to never do this. They have always claimed that the Social Security number is solely to be used for the purpose of Social Security, thus the name. And Social Security is an old age pension program, which has nothing to do with 18-year-olds being registered for a draft. It was never meant to be a national ID number, which would be unconstitutional and thus illegal. This works hand in glove with the real ID, as they call it, which is a national ID, something that is also illegal, which is why I don't have one and won't get one. There is an extremely high likelihood that there will be an actual draft very soon. Otherwise, why would have Congress passed this law just now and not 50 years ago? The current system has been in place for many decades. So why the timing now? When a draft does happen, be aware, it will be too late to escape at that point. Germany has just passed a law that all men between ages 18 and 35 may not leave the country for more than 3 months without permission from the military draft board, which they are highly unlikely to give, because they are planning a war with Russia soon. This will absolutely come to the U.S. and soon. With a Social Security number and without a second passport, the only option for young men will be to go and fight and likely die or get seriously injured in an overseas war. The US cannot win against Iran in the current war, and yet it cannot afford to lose, as the petrodollar, which is the very foundation of the financial structure that dominates the world, that relies on this not happening. In other words, it relies on the US not losing. Since the US can neither win nor accept a loss, the inevitable result will be an endless war, which will require several million troops as fresh meat to feed into this war. My prediction is that the draft does go into force early next year, but will be announced only after the midterm elections. There will be huge protests, especially in blue cities, and Trump will use this to incite more unrest as he feels that this strengthens him with his base. And in fact, it does. Eventually, he will taco, as he always does, and he will instead turn to a solution proposed by the Democrats, which will be to get illegal immigrants to fight and die instead. He will offer them citizenship along with their families in exchange for a brief excursion to the Middle East. Of course, brief is in the eye of the beholder, and these tours are likely to extend to many years. But